Welcome in. This is the John Cast Podcast, episode number 62 today with our guest, Jim Polzin from the Wisconsin State Journal. But before we get to Jim and talk about the ever-changing Big Ten Conference, I want to give thanks to my sponsors, including Ian's Pizza. We are currently in the midst. We put the promotion together. Now we're just trying to finish up put on the finishing touches rather, and we'll have a promotion from Ian's Pizza for you later on this summer going into the fall. That might be a hint of some of the things we're trying to do. Also brought to you now by Me and Julio. Again, Me and Julio is back. Go check out Me and Julio. It's right along Fish Hatchery Road. If you're ever in Madison and Fitchburg area, it's fantastic. Go sit out on the deck, have a margarita. They've got specials in the margaritas Tuesdays and Thursdays. They've got wine Wednesdays. They've also got a great variety of menu items to choose from. I like to go with the Bang Bang Chicken and the Bang Bang Shrimp Tacos. I switch it up sometimes as well. But go check out Me and Julio and check out JohnCastPodcast.com. You can sign up for the newsletter and get the latest from this podcast, all the promotions, all the latest interviews. You're going to know about it, and I'm not going to spam you. And today's guest, as I mentioned, from the Wisconsin State Journal, he is Jim Polzin, here to talk about the Big Ten Conference that added a couple of new schools to it recently. Jim, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you got to fill me in. How surprised were you when you saw the news kind of start to leak, like USC, UCLA are coming to the conference, and then like 24 hours later or whatever that timeline was, all of a sudden, boom, they're in the conference and it's a done deal?
Yeah, I was pretty stunned. We were in the middle of a all sports staff planning meeting for football, just kind of getting all our ducks in a row, looking ahead to media day and all that stuff. And somebody had Twitter on and it came across, and we all just kind of sat there stunned for a while. And it brought the meeting to a halt. I probably shouldn't be surprised by anything that happens in college athletics anymore, but this one was pretty stunning to me. There's a lot of things about it that make sense. There's a lot of things about it that don't make sense. It's a game changer, and it's obviously a reaction to what the SEC did last year by grabbing Oklahoma and Texas from the Big 12. I mean, this is kind of the Big Ten's move. And really, this domino effect has been going on for years and years and years. And this is just another big one that I'm sure is going to cause changes down the road. I just don't know when. Yeah.
So it was the Big Ten's reaction to the SEC, perhaps, like you said, and bringing in Texas and the like. But what happened with the alliance? There was the alliance between the Big Ten, the Pac12, and the ACC. And I think you even wrote about it. Like there was no contract written, but that thing, it's just terminated.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know how Kevin Warren gets in the same room as the Pac-12 commissioner, George Kliavkoff, or however his name is pronounced.
Yeah.
And looks him in his face, the whole alliance, going back to what I wrote a year ago when this came out, just sounded very flimsy. It just didn't sound, there were a lot of words said that day and not a lot of things being spoken. There weren't a lot of facts out. It was just kind of a concept, an idea. There was a lot of interesting parts to it, focusing on student mental health. I thought the scheduling aspect of it sounded good in theory. It just didn't seem like a lot of it had been worked out. And that seemed like a reaction to the SEC's, grabbing Texas and Oklahoma. It's just kind of hey, us three power conferences are going to band together and not let the SEC bully us around. So I understand why it was done. I just don't think much of anything got accomplished in this, 10 months since it was formed. And clearly this breaks it. There's no way that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 could work together. I think the Pac-12 is going to fall apart. It always sounds like there's kind of reaction within the Pac-12. The remaining teams are scrambling to find something. And so this alliance, like I said, while good in theory, it sounded like it wasn't sturdy back then. And now this kind of completely puts the kibosh on it.
Yeah. Is there some hostility, do you think, between what is left of the Pac-12? Like you said, by the time this podcast is released, the Pac-12 could lose more members, perhaps to the Big 12. I know there were rumors out there that they were looking to add some Pac-12 schools, perhaps again to the Big 10. So everything could change. But do you think there's some hostility here between the ACC and the Pac-12 saying, hey, what are you doing? I thought we had a thing going.
Yeah, I would think so. And again, everybody's I understand why it's done. Everybody's got to look out for their own well-being. And Kevin Warren, as the Big Ten commissioner, can't be so concerned about the Pac-12 and its well-being that he forgets what his job is, and that's to protect the members within the Big Ten. And that's what this was. I mean, going and grabbing USC and UCLA was in a lot of ways a no-brainer. Bringing that LA TV market and two tradition-rich programs makes a lot of sense. But I just don't, by doing that, you can't then not look at it as he stabbed the Pac-12 in the back and this alliance, whatever it was, formed. So I think there's got to be some hard feelings. It sounds like USC and UCLA kind of initiated this. So I don't know that Kevin Warren was actively recruiting those programs. But however, it's just kind of a ugly process of college athletics. And we see that with a lot of things. NIL, there's a lot of good stuff with it, but it can get messy. The transfer rule, there's a lot of good things with it, but it can get messy. And I think this is another thing. Realignment, like I said, there's a lot of really interesting aspects to it, but none of this can be done without hurting feelings somewhere along the way. And I think there's a lot of hurt feelings within the Pac-12.
Yeah. You did mention, you said it does make sense in a lot of ways and it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways. I think you're kind of maybe alluding to it a little bit there. So in what ways do you like this new, we'll just stay with the two teams for now. It's 16 right now. It could get bigger. In what ways does this make sense? And in what ways does this not make sense to you?
The money aspect makes sense. I mean, the Big Ten is in the middle of negotiating a new media rights deal, and that's already going to climb upwards of $1 billion. Adding the Los Angeles market, one of the major TV markets in the U.S., only is going to add to that and make it more attractive of a deal, I would think. So, I mean, I think that part of it makes sense. I think, as we saw years ago with Rutgers and Maryland, the Big Ten expanded east just to kind of expand its footprint. Well, this goes the other way, and you go all the way. You're now literally coast to coast, and I think that part of it, makes a lot of sense. I think adding USC, one of the blue blood football programs, and UCLA, one of the blue blood basketball programs, makes a lot of sense for both of those two major revenue producing sports for the Big Ten. But when you talk about things that don't quite make sense, and again, like you said, this could all shake out where it's going to be more than 16. So some of this could be, change over time. But right now you've got two teams kind of out on an island on the West Coast. And for them, scheduling wise and travel wise, I see a ton of issues. It's one thing for like UCLA football to jump on a charter plane and go play a Saturday game in Maryland or Rutgers. That's not that much of a deal. Those are all chartered flights. But how about the Rutgers women's soccer team going out to USC for a women's soccer game, and how about even let's keep this local. Wisconsin going out to UCLA for a Thursday night basketball game. You're talking about a lot of travel, a lot of missed class time. I mentioned this in my column last week too, and I think it's an important point, is that mental health now more than ever is a big thing for student athletes, and you're at least introducing the possibility of more stress on college athletes, student athletes with moves like this. Just in terms, like I said, the lost class time, the time away from home, the extra travel. And you've got things we have to remember is that some of these non-revenue sports don't fly charter. There's commercial flying to some of it. So it's just complicated, and I'm sure it'll all get worked out. But that was the thing to me that, if you're listing pros and cons, I thought some of those things fell in the cons part of this. But again, let's face it, money is the number one thing, right? Yeah. And that's what anybody who's making these decisions is going to look at first.
So if money is the number one thing, and you see all of these universities, colleges kind of combining and shifting into these super conferences slowly and steadily, what is the next step then, as far as the Big Ten perspective, in the creation of what appears to be this big super conference? What's the next step?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I don't know if now it's kind of like a chess game, and it goes back to the SEC and says, your move, SEC, let's see what you do and we'll react to it. I do think from a Big Ten perspective, the big domino out there is Notre Dame. And really the ball's kind of in Notre Dame's court. The Big Ten has wanted Notre Dame for years and years and years. It's never been that part of it. It's always been Notre Dame's preference to stay independent. And I think that's becoming harder and harder to do with moves like this, where now you've got two 16-team conferences, and also, Notre Dame and USC have this football tradition of playing each other. Does that get impacted now that that USC is moving to the Big Ten. So I think Notre Dame is losing options to some degree. And I think what Notre Dame's going to have to decide is all these musical chairs happening, are we going to get left out at some point? And do we have to move into a conference? And then so Notre Dame moves into the Big Ten. I think that opens up possibilities of, again, the super conference, which I think is probably where we're headed, John. I really think that at some point, I don't know how many super conferences we're talking, at least two, certainly the SEC and the Big Ten. I don't know if the Big 12 or ACC or that some combination of the both with the rest of the Pac-12 teams. If we form three super conferences, I don't know how that works out, but I do think that at some point, 5 years, maybe just to throw that number out there, we could see a 20-team Big Ten, give or take a couple. And then so that, not to make this too long-winded, but if Notre Dame is team 17, then I think you probably try to get an Oregon or a Washington or both, or Stanford's in the mix. And then I think you look to the East Coast too and try to steal a North Carolina and try to, again, keep it coast to coast and go as far south and north as you can and try to make it a truly large footprint.
It's okay. This is kind of a not important question, but at some point, does the term Big Ten have to be dropped when you get to 22 teams and there's 2 or 3 super conferences in college, and one actually, like the SEC, you can still be the SEC, even though maybe the geography doesn't work out exactly right. But this is just a side question. Is there a name change, do you believe, in the future?
Some people are asking that last week when this stuff went down, and these discussions came up when Rutgers and Maryland joined the league, and Nebraska, and even back when Penn State joined the league, because mathematically it didn't make sense anymore. But I just think the Big Ten is such a brand. It's just how you think of the league. It's how it's recognized, that I don't know that that's going to change. And I don't. The problem is you can't really plug a new number in there, because I just think that number could be evolving over time. So I think it'll remain the Big Ten. That's what I would predict. But you're right. It does. It's a head scratcher in terms of, at some point you could have twice as many teams as the number in the brand.
Yeah. The more I think about super conferences, Jim, I don't know how you feel, the more I get intrigued by it. Now, listen, are we losing tradition and losing regional stuff? Yes, it is. But this is the way it's shaping out, and you better buckle up and get ready, because it's not going backwards. So the more I look forward to super conferences, and you think 20 plus teams, and you talked about Notre Dame, let's say Notre Dame's in there and Oregon's in there. And like you mentioned, Stanford's in there and Washington and the 2 schools, UCLA, USC. Do we see like these 4? How do you think this shapes out? What's this going to look like you mentioned 5 years. What's this going to look like in 10 years, in a decade? Will we have like divisions like the West, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, the East, or whatever, and almost have this feel of, professional conference where you look at the standings, like in the NFL, and you look at the NFC, and you look at the North and the whatever, will we have more of that type of a feel for college athletics?
Yeah, probably, I would think. And that's why I think it's important. That's why I don't think this is the ending move, just from USC and UCLA's perspective. They're going to want teams out by them to kind of, regionalize it for them, and not be the only 2 out on the island where, they're the ones traveling so much. And while it's a hassle for the 14 teams that are, currently in the Big Ten, it's really a hassle for the 2 out there right now. So yeah, I do think it's probably where it's headed. I think if you want to look truly big picture, like I said, it's probably 3 super conference teams. I think those teams break off from the NCAA and form kind of their own thing. I mean, that's inevitable. I like the intrigue of it, just like you. I mean, it's all kind of fascinating, and exciting is probably a word to use. The thing I'm a little concerned about is the smaller schools, the mid-majors. What happens to them? Because those schools need the power conference teams to play, the bye games. You need a, like this year, Illinois State's a bad example because it's an FCS team, but the Mountain West team that comes and plays the Big Ten at a Big Ten game and gets $1 million just for playing the game, that funds not only the football program, but other programs within the athletic department. It's so important for them. So that's the thing I worry about, is if we have this power conference, 65 teams, if they all break apart, however many of them go, I worry about the little guy. And And it's just college sports is not going to look the same. And while I realize that there are really interesting, fascinating parts to that, the collateral damage is concerns me. And again, that's the same thing with NIL and transfer. Like I said before, is that there's a lot of good stuff, but it's not 100% no brainer. There are different things that reactionary pieces that are going to happen because of it.
What's the future? This is a question I see on social media a ton. What's the future of the Rose Bowl if you start to take these Pac-12 teams and put them back into the Big Ten Conference? I mean, to me, that it feels like the Rose Bowl is never going to be the same. I mean, it already has kind of changed throughout the years, but I don't think it's ever going to be the same. How do you see that?
Yeah, no, I think that's put that one in the con list, if we're listing pros and cons, because that's always been a tradition, unlike any other, and something for Big Ten teams to look forward to. Now, I think it's changed a little bit over the years where the Rose Bowl's become part of the playoff. And maybe if we do end up with this giant power conference grouping that breaks off and forms this playoff at the end of the year, maybe the Rose Bowl game or that venue remains part of it. But it's just not. It's not going to be like it was where Wisconsin could play UCLA in the Rose Bowl at the end of the year in a one of the great traditions and one of the great bowl games. I mean, now it's going to be a regular season game in September where Wisconsin's out there. And again, I think there are good things to that, especially for this university in particular has a huge alumni base out in the LA, Southern California area, even Northern California. So I'm sure those people are all very excited that Wisconsin's going to be out there more. But in terms of the actual bowl game, I don't see that surviving like it has been, and that's going to be for all bowl games. I just think, it's a domino. I keep using that analogy, but there's going to be things that, because of these changes in college sports, things that go by the wayside, and I think this is probably one of them.
And so then, you start talking about the playoffs, and you start wondering too, will they switch to 8 teams, and how will that look? Will you pick equal amounts of teams from each super conference? Will one conference be left out? Will you have a champion of your conference take on the champion of that conference, kind of like an AFC versus NFC? You start to wonder how all of this is going to play out. And then you start thinking well, maybe this is the reason they haven't really expanded to 8 teams yet. They're waiting for everything to settle down before they actually do anything with the college football playoff.
Yeah, I think that's why I think the Big Ten, the Alliance, I mean, I think the one positive to come out of the Alliance is they did kind of tap the brakes, and the SEC and Notre Dame to some degree were leading that college football playoff discussion. And I don't think the Big Ten and ACC and Pac12 were quite ready to commit to a long-range plan. And I think a lot of it does, like you said, go back to this media rights deal getting done, which I think it's going to be done sometime between now and probably close to the start of the season, and that'll go into effect 23 and beyond. I think that's a big item to cross off the list for Kevin Warren, and then you can kind of begin planning. But I don't know, we talked before the show even started, long range projections. I don't know what the timing of all this is. When I wrote that column last Thursday, I think I was writing it as if this would be kind of a sudden, this domino is going to lead to other dominoes quickly falling. I don't know that that's the case anymore. I don't know that I believe that. I think it's going to be kind of a slow rolling out period. And again, I think we're all kind of probably waiting on Notre Dame. I think that's the next big thing that has to happen.
I wish they'd just rip it off like a Band-Aid and just forget this slow. We'll do it in a year. We'll do it in 2 years. We don't know where we want to. Just pick a spot. We're moving that way. Jump on. Let's get this thing going, because it's not only going to be football that's going to be different and intriguing. Imagine that Big Ten basketball where you've got UCLA, like you said, and then if you add a North Carolina and you're the Badgers, even for men's basketball and women's basketball too, it's going to be really, really unique.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I do kind of worry about the non-revenue sports to some degree.
Right.
I think all this is probably inevitable to some degree for football, and I think men's basketball will be just fine, and volleyball. I think women's basketball, those sports will be fine. But I do, there's a lot of student athletes that play sports that we don't spend a lot of time talking about. But I don't think they should be forgotten altogether. And I do, I'm interested to see how, sports like that survive and if they can thrive from this. Maybe this is a good thing, and I'm just not totally seeing the big picture, but it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yeah. If you had asked me if this had happened by when Nebraska came, what was that, 2011, I want to say, when Nebraska joined the conference, to me, that was like, that makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Nebraska, Midwest school, it fits the region, it fits the mold. And then the Rutgers, Maryland thing to me didn't make any sense from a conference standpoint, from a traditional, this is how you think of a conference. And so when UCLA and USC, now I don't think of Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa. You can't think like that anymore. So I actually kind of have flipped the switch there before because I don't know. It's just the way it is now. But before, Nebraska made sense. Rutgers, Maryland didn't make any sense. And now I guess UCLA and USC to me make sense because now I know where we're headed.
No, I think you're right. I mean, I think those moves make more sense because of the Rutgers, Maryland move, which didn't make any sense, right? I think it's easier for us to embrace this chaos in part because 8 years ago now with Rutgers and Maryland, something that didn't make is still kind of a head scratcher to some degree, has become normal to some, for the most part, and now it's going to be crazy. I don't know. I'm interested to see where it goes. I really am. It's going to be, it just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning, and I don't know when we're all going to get off this merry-go-round.
Final question then, let's bring it back to Madison and the Badgers. So how do you think the addition, we'll just stick with what we know for now, UCLA and USC, how does this affect Wisconsin? How does this affect them not only with recruiting, but with competition? Like, how does Wisconsin feel about this, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think publicly they're saying they like it. I think, again, not to focus too much on money, but you're talking about Los Angeles market brings in more money for a media rights deal, which means more money for a place like Wisconsin. I mean, each of these Big Ten teams is going to get a humongous chunk of money every year, and that money goes a long ways. That money funds a lot of things in the athletic department. So from that perspective, good. I think from the fans' perspective, it depends who you talk to. I mean, I think there's a lot of people that are excited about, hey, USC and UCLA are big-time opponents, different opponents. It's change. It's good. It's something new. I think there's a lot of people, and I've already heard from a lot of them in emails and Twitter that don't like. They want tradition. They can't wrap their head around Wisconsin playing at USC on a conference game in September. Like it doesn't make sense to them. So I think it's kind of an eye of the beholder thing. I think I feel pretty similar to you in that this change was all inevitable, and you kind of got to embrace it, or you're just going to be miserable and fighting it. I just think you got to see how it goes, and that's why I'm willing to embrace it and see where it goes. Again, like it'd be one thing if we knew it was done, but I think that's the thing is we don't know it's over yet, and it may be not even close to being over.
Right. Yeah. We'll probably get over 20 teams at some point. Right now we're at 16, or fairly soon we'll be at 16. But even then, just final thoughts here. Like, just think about the schedule. Like the schedule, you're always going to have, like now with the addition of a UCLA or USC, you're going to have that on the schedule. Like, do you make a deal with the SEC to play a non-conference crossover? Like, just think about how massive, if you started making deals with the other conferences and these non-conference games, like this is going to be an outrageously tough schedule.
Right. And the coaches, and that's where, the coaches have always kind of fought to some degree, both in football. Let's just keep this at football and men's basketball. Football coaches fought against going more than 8 conference games because that's a grind, playing 8 really good opponents, and went up to 9, and I can't see it going. The coaches are going to fight tooth and nail to have it stop at 9 games, because if you're talking about playing 10 conference games, that's hard. That's a grind, and bodies get beat down. In men's basketball, they went up to 20 games, which, if you're playing 20 games and there's a 16-team conference, that regular season conference title kind of gets washed down a little bit. You're not playing as many teams twice anymore, and it becomes more of what teams you play once and which teams you play twice. It's just kind of a watered down version of it. But the coaches, I don't think are going to want to go to 22 or whatever number it gets to make it more. It's just it becomes kind of messy, because what's good in terms of money isn't necessarily good in terms of what a coach and what student athletes want. So it's going to be interesting. And again, like if we go up even more, it just becomes more and more complicated in terms of scheduling. And like, let's one quick backtrack. The teams I talked about, the mid majors, to pick one team, Toledo, the Mid American Conference. What happens to those teams? Because right now those teams are filling out schedules in all sports, really. If those teams suffer and those athletic departments ultimately, not fall apart, but they could go to a lower division, I suppose. Then you're not going to see Big Ten teams playing them, and it just becomes, how do you fill out your schedule? I think becomes a problem. So I think there's, as with everything, when you make big moves like this, there's unintended consequences, and I think there's going to be probably some of that to deal with in the next 5-10 years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk next week when Oregon and Stanford get added, and then the week after when Notre Dame comes aboard with North Carolina. No, it's going to be really fun. I think I'm behind super conferences now because I can't stop it, and so you might as well just enjoy what it's going to be and get used to it, because that's your college football for the rest of your life. Like it's moving toward that way. Get ready. The past is the past. Jim Polzin, I really do appreciate you taking a couple minutes to talk with me about this.
My pleasure, John. Thanks for having me on.
All right, there you go. That is Jim Polzin of the Wisconsin State Journal to talk about the crazy conference realignment with UCLA and USC coming to the Big Ten. And like he said, it's not over. We'll get up to 20 and maybe even more. I'd like to thank me and Julio for jumping back on board as a sponsor. Go check out me and Julio. They're on Fish Hatchery Road if you're in Madison, right next to Fitchburg, and they've got a great outdoor seating area for summertime, margaritas, food, family fun. It's awesome. Me and Julio. Ian's Pizza as well, with 3 locations in Madison, 3 in Milwaukee as well. They're in Seattle. They're in Denver. They're everywhere. Go enjoy a delicious slice of Ian's Pizza and watch for our next promotion, joncastpodcast.com. Sign up for the newsletter, and then you won't miss the next promotion. All right. Thank you. Thanks to Jim Polzin, and thanks to you for listening to this edition of the Joncast Podcast.